Iceberg of misinformation by terrorists. That's Aung San Suu Kyi's take on her country's persecution of Rohingya. While people worldwide are protesting the carnage, governments have been slow to react. Israel says its arms sale to the Myanmarese junta is a diplomatic matter and will proceed. Norway's Nobel Committee too says it will not rescind Suu Kyi's Peace Prize. To add to that, Canada has not said whether it will cancel her honorary Canadian citizenship. Join me, Waqar Rizvi, as we discuss reactions to Myanmar's Rohingya crisis.
Rohingya Muslims were already labeled as one of the most persecuted minority groups in the world. Their agony and pain, however, have deepened in recent weeks as the killings and tortures intensified following attacks on security forces that have been blamed on the Rohingya. The United Nations says more than 1,000 people may have been killed in Myanmar's Rakhine state, where the army is attacking Rohingya Muslims. According to the world body, thousands of Rohingya have fled to neighboring Bangladesh since late August, when the violence intensified. New arrivals recount the harrowing experiences they underwent before leaving their villages and belongings behind.
The soldiers turned the guns at me, but their ammunition's finished. One of the troops then beat me with the gun and broke my hand.
Uprooted from home, Rohingya are not even safe and welcome in Bangladesh, as the country is planning to send them to an isolated island. Despite self-explanatory footage, witness accounts and reports, Myanmar's government, however, remains defiant to the international calls for stopping the army from committing crimes against Rohingya. Myanmar says it is purging the restive Rakhine state of, quote, terrorists, and is trying to protect civilians. On Thursday, images were released of fires burning in an abandoned Rohingya village, challenging the government's claim that the minority Muslims set their own houses ablaze. Meanwhile, over 365,000 people have signed a petition calling for the Nobel Committee to revoke Aung San Suu Kyi's Peace Prize. South Africa's Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who has also won the prize, has urged Suu Kyi to do something for ending the deadly crackdown. Suu Kyi, who has been cheered by the West, is Myanmar's de facto leader but has done nothing to stem the crisis. She's even critical of media for disseminating, quote, misinformation about operations in Rakhine.
They have the policy since 1963. They have a target that Muslim population must go to such a weak level and the slave level. So that's what they are doing. There is no Muslim in military, no Muslim in politics, no Muslim in parliament, no Muslim in the civil service, no Muslim in government.
On the other hand, international rights groups have called on Israel to stop its arms sales to Myanmar amid the country's deadly operations in Rakhine. Tel Aviv has paid no heed to such calls and continues to supply Myanmar's army with different types of arms. This is while the US and the EU have imposed an arms embargo on Myanmar. The end of the violence against Myanmar's Muslim community now hinges on concerted efforts by the international community and Muslim nations.
Our guests for this discussion are managing editor and columnist at Veterans Today, Mr. Jim W. Dean, who is joining us live from Atlanta. And we're also joined by the head of the Islamic Human Rights Commission, Mr. Masood Shajare, who is joining us live from London. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. Mr. Shajare, I'll start with you. The Nobel Committee, as you well know, Mr. Shajare, that awarded Suu Kyi the Peace Prize, says it cannot revoke her award because it only relied on her activities before the prize was given to her and not after. How do you feel about that excuse?
Well, that is nothing just but an excuse. The reality is that something needs to be done. I mean, really, the history is actually quite clear. The Rohingya Muslims have been oppressed for a very long time, long before the democracy so-called returning or starting in Myanmar. And the fact of the matter is that even under the juntas, while they were being prosecuted, they never prosecuted it and persecuted in the way that what is happening now. I mean, this is undoubtedly a genocide taking place, ethnic cleansing taking place. Day by day, the situation of Rohingya Muslims is actually deteriorating. The more so-called democracy comes to the nation, the more of oppression against the Rohingya Muslims takes place. You know, they were much better off under the junta. And I think this is a reality needs to be addressed by the international community. This excuse that Myanmar is walking towards democracy is actually a very empty excuse, and it should not be you know, accommodated. And I really feel that you know, now, after this incident, really there is a mockery of over the whole issue of the Nobel Peace Award, because really the sort of people who have been receiving it, Kissinger, Shimon Peres, Aung San Suu Kyi, you know, these are the people who are directly involved in committing crimes against humanity.
Mr. Dean, how do you feel about this? Because, you know, one thing Mr. Shajari said there, which was interesting, is that ever since, quote-unquote, democracy has come into Myanmar, it seems the situation has gotten that much worse for Rohingya Muslims. That doesn't really make sense, does it?
It doesn't until you you bring in the term fake democracy, and which fits the case exactly. And we also have the flip side of that is what we have going on here is the fallacy of U.S. Exceptionalism being laid bare for the empty paper bag that it is. When it said very early on, with no apologies, that they plan to take no sanctions against Myanmar military and the government whatsoever. And we know darn well that if this was happening to Christians in the country, or say if it was happening to the Jewish community in that country, that the U.S. and other nations would already be bombing the Myanmar military as we're talking today, and they would be standing up at their pulpits about how we have to bring an end to this and show them that this can't be done. So these very and long unfortunate Rohingya people have now unfortunately replaced the Yemeni people on the bottom of the barrel as probably one of the most abused groups of people in the world, and who have also been abandoned by most of the world, including, unfortunately, a lot of the Muslim countries that have lined up with the Gulf states politically in this thing. And I also think that the casualty numbers that are being reported are low, because when you have a chaotic situation like that, where people are on the move, running through the jungle, crossing rivers, that a lot of people you're going to find out go missing. They died, or they were killed, or they drowned in the rivers that are never going to be found. So we're all really learning something about our international institutions and the reality of some of these terms like democracy and international diplomacy. The rubber really meets the road, not only on what gets done, but also what doesn't get done, which is happening here to these very unfortunate and really undeserving people who've really evidenced have no real ability to threaten the country or the military whatsoever.
Mr. Shajari, I wanted to pick up on Mr. Dean's mention of the Muslim world, because I was speaking to a guest yesterday, Mr. Shajari, who basically termed the Muslim world's reaction to the Rohingya crisis as too little, too late. Do you agree with that?
Well, I go even further. It is not too little. I've seen nothing whatsoever, with the exception of sort of some sort of rhetorics from Turkey and Malaysia, Indonesia. We really, and Iran, which have been sort of campaigning for a very long time, and indeed Ayatollah Khamenei has taken every opportunity to raise the plight of the Rohingya Muslim. We are seeing nothing from anyone else. I mean, this countries like Saudi Arabia and the Persian Gulf state, they're going and bombing the poorest country in the world, i.e. Yemen, and committing war crimes for their political end. But they're not willing to lift a finger in support of these innocent Muslims who are being slaughtered in front of our eyes, and the whole of the international community. I mean, this is outrageous. But what is also outrageous is the fact that helping and supporting and bringing a stop to this genocide is not an option. Under international law, every country in this earth has got the responsibility to make sure that genocide will not take place, and it will not accommodate a genocide taking place anywhere in the world. And the reality is that the whole of the Western world is involved in supporting this by their silence at least, and by the fact that they're playing politics and politicking when ordinary innocent people are being slaughtered and killed in this sort of a mass operation of cleansing and the Rohingya Muslims. This is outrageous. I think we need to demand from all our governments in the West and everywhere else that they actually have to stand up to their commitment under international law and indeed implement it. And we need to take any action, including legal action against these governments for supporting these onslaught, either by silence or by political sort of apathy.
Mr. Dean, let's take a look at some of the reactions from the Western world. I believe it's the United States and the UK, if I'm not mistaken, who have at least claimed publicly that they may have stopped their arms sales for now to the Myanmar junta. However, Israel, as you know, Mr. Dean, has said that its arms sales to the military junta of Myanmar are quote-unquote a clearly diplomatic matter, and it will not be stopping those arms sales at this time, regardless of what the situation with the Rohingya Muslims may be. What do you make of that?
Well, that's Israel advertising itself that if you're in the doghouse anywhere in the world as an unfortunate country, you can always count on Israel to sell you arms and to get you anything else that you might want, for instance, getting around any sanctions or embargoes, because no one is going to do anything to Israel because they'll just say, we just don't abide by any international rules or anyone else's desires, and we don't really give a hoot if anybody doesn't like what we do. So this actually plays to Israel's benefit, because they've done this their whole career. Even in Africa, they were working with insurgent groups, hoping that they would someday take over their country and then give Israel a lot of special deals down the road. They're sometimes thinking 20 years out in terms of who might be in control of these countries. So this gets back into the general tone of there's a lot of powerful interest in the country, and we have the deep state here in the US that thrive on chaos. They do not thrive on peace, because peace only gives you very, very limited markets. The growth is very, very limited, and they love upheaval, whether it's markets, wars, social instability, these mass migrations where you have the poor Bangladesh that does not have the ability to take care of all these refugees. But I also might say one of the key things in this for the UN, which does have its hands tied in how hard it can really complain to what's going on, because they have to maintain their facilities in these countries. But they reported that they were being blocked by the military from getting relief supplies, desperately needed relief supplies, into these areas where these atrocities have taken place. And there's no more clear proof of a crime against humanity than blocking UN refugee people going into what we know is a desperate situation. And we're going to be watching very closely whether corporate media reports that very much, or if any countries step up to support the U.S. or claim that Myanmar should have special charges for interfering in relief like that.
Mr. Shahjareh, going back to this talk of arms sales, you know, when democracy, quote unquote, was declared in Myanmar, many experts said that this was already about the natural resources and the market capability of Myanmar at that time, that Western countries were looking at this as an economy where they could sell weapons and get the minerals and resources of that country. Do you think that's true?